As we continue to move from the exhibition and move from the Civil War period to the post-Civil War period, visitors get the chance, the really special chance to see two foundational documents of our nation, two milestone documents that were critical to the abolishment of slavery in the United States in 1865 after 246 years. The first of those documents is a copy of the Emancipation Proclamation, which is signed by President Abraham Lincoln. This was his wartime measure in which he offered freedom to enslaved people in Confederate territories. It was a partial measure. It didn't abolish slavery in the United States in 1863, but it was a very important measure for shifting the discourse around the Civil War and shifting the focus from preserving the Union to abolishing slavery. The second critical document we have, and again, this is a really rare opportunity for visitors to see these objects that just ooze historical importance, is a handwritten copy of the 13th Amendment resolution. This was written probably around February 1st, 1865, after Congress had drafted the language of the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery in the United States, and Congress was getting ready to send this amendment to the states for ultimate ratification. So this is a document that completed the partial step taken by the Emancipation Proclamation by finally abolishing slavery in the U.S. And this too is signed by Abraham Lincoln, as well as Vice President Hamlin and other key historical figures in Congress at that moment. And as visitors encounter these two documents, they also enter the third chronological section of the exhibition. This is a section that runs from the end of the Civil War and Reconstruction, so from 1865 through 1950, through the World War II era. And it's a period in which we see kind of two parallel developments in Black history. We see Black Americans embracing the promises of freedom and seeking out new access to education, to political participation, and to creating their own businesses and so forth. Yet also we see backlash from the white establishment that wanted to preserve its supremacy, preserve its power. And so we start to see the codification of legalized segregation as a new form of oppression on Black people. So it's a period that very much explores this kind of push and pull, this dynamic, this sense of both progress and regress or backlash in the fight for equality. And a couple of the elements of this section include a focus on Peter Jacob Carter, who's one of the 100 Black men who got involved in Virginia politics between the end of the Civil War and 1900. So Peter Jacob Carter was one of those men who took advantage of the new rights guaranteed by the Reconstruction era amendments, particularly the 15th Amendment, which gave Black men the right to vote. He got engaged in Virginia politics and was one of the longest serving Black men in politics in that period. He served for 8 years in the Virginia General Assembly and was a well-respected colleague. And we have various documents related to the vote, to Black men getting the franchise. One particularly extraordinary document is a poll book listing the colored voters who registered to vote in the 5th District of the County of Norfolk in 1867. And it's interesting to consider the desire for political participation and the way that Black people embrace that against the context of the backlash they faced. And I think that backlash is really exemplified by the passage of a new state constitution in Virginia in 1902. And that was a constitution that was really kind of rammed through the General Assembly with the explicit aim of disenfranchising black male voters. That was the intended purpose. And what's really interesting, and I think also ironic as well, is that through this Constitution, which instituted a poll tax, an understanding clause, and some other limitations on the black franchise, this Constitution, it reduced black votership by 80%, yet it also affected white voters, particularly lower income white voters. It ended up disenfranchising 50% of white men. So interesting to ponder about what democracy means and how voting rights have been manipulated. Now, as I mentioned, this section looks at push and pull dynamic, not only the great progress that black people had in the age after slavery, the era after slavery was ended, yet also new challenges they faced, which came about in various ways, perhaps most obviously through the practice of segregation. So there's several elements in the exhibition that explore the effects of segregation. Segregation which is maybe most publicly manifest in the ways in which various services, doorways, and so forth were designated by race. And we give visitors a visual reminder of that segregated world by recreating a building that has two separate doorways, one for white people and one for black people. As visitors walk through this, we hope that it prompts them to think about how dehumanizing life must have been for black people in the world of Jim Crow segregation, in which they were treated like second-class citizens and limited to what kinds of services they could use, when they could enter certain buildings, what water fountain they could drink from, where they could sit on a bus, and so forth. On the back side of this wall, we have a little feature devoted to the Green Book, which was an annually issued travel guide which listed restaurants, hotels, and other services that were friendly to black people. One of the reasons why I decided to place this feature on the back of those segregated doors is to remind our audiences that black people, they to the best of their ability in that very discriminatory world, they tried to take control of their lives, and they were able to give their business to businesses who were friendly to them. So they could make a choice to spend their dollars at such and such a hotel, which was known for being more accommodating to black travelers. So this was a way that black travelers could negotiate the world, the segregated world of the Jim Crow South, and also use the power of their purse to support businesses that supported them. Another featured individual in this section is Clemenceau Givens, a Richmond native who joined the Tuskegee Airmen, who became one of those pioneering black pilots at a time when the U.S. military was segregated and when black service people were often limited in the types of roles they could hold. Black pilots clamored for access to training and the ability to serve as pilots, and so the Tuskegee Airmen program was founded. And Clemenceau Givens was one of the nearly 1,000 men who earned his wings as a Tuskegee Airman pilot. I should specify pilot because the program ultimately had over 15,000 personnel serving in it in various capacities as mechanics, as radio operators, and so forth. And World War II was a moment that really crystallized the deep inequality and paradox of the segregated South, of the Jim Crow world. Black people were being asked to serve their countries, to sacrifice their lives, to fight fascism abroad to fight the Nazis in Europe and in other theaters of World War II, yet at the same time they were being oppressed and discriminated against in America. And that paradox was encapsulated by the protest movement that came to be known as the Double V, double victory, and that was to capture the sense that Black people in the World War II era were fighting for two victories: victory abroad against the Nazis and their allies, as well as victory at home, victory against segregation and discrimination. And Clemenceau Givens, as I say, is one of those men who joined the U.S. Army, which then had control of the Air Force, became a Tuskegee Airman, and he made the ultimate sacrifice. He was killed while flying over the coast of Italy in 1944. And a couple of the items that help tell Clemenceau Givens' incredible story, we have one of his patches showing the crest of the Tuskegee Airmen, this Black Panther who's spitting fire. Spit fire was their rallying cry. And this is a very poignant document. We have the Western Union telegram by which Clemenceau's family was notified of his death. And we also have some costume items related to the Tuskegee Airmen. This bomber jacket, which was worn by a man, Thomas Winborn, who trained as a radio operator with the Tuskegee Airmen. And then we have another item, this pilot helmet and goggles that was worn by another Tuskegee Airman.